Okay, well, we've got a lot of information to cover today, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll probably have some latecomers coming in. But welcome to everyone. My name is Jen Ellisted. I'm the Director of Education here at ABC. Thank you for joining us today for the Chapter 17 Requirements webinar. Today, our presenters are Mike Mazzoli. He is the Vice President, North Region Building and Construction with Intertech. And we also have Steve Klessig, VP of Architecture and Engineering and co-owner of Keller Inc. Just as a reminder, if everyone can keep themselves on mute unless you are actively participating or asking a question. Otherwise, all questions, if we want to put them in the chat for now, we'll have time for questions at the end. Feel free to use that chat box throughout the meeting, and I'll be monitoring that if we have anything urgent that needs to be said. So, Michael and Steve, thank you both for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thanks for having us. And so I guess, and Jennifer, as the chats come through, because I'll probably be paying attention to the screen here, if
Yep.
you can just kind of let me know there's a question. And if anybody has any questions, it should be pretty informal today. If you need to ask any questions, just kind of jump in and we can kind of have those discussions. And I'm sure there's a lot of things that we'll cover today that will kind of generate some conversations. And so hopefully today, like we're going to really go over and understand, um, what special inspections are, why are they in place? If you want to say, well, I'll give you my best guess of why they're in place. And then we're going to learn about some of the tests and requirements that are out there, the qualifications of the inspector, and then just learn about the submittal process and really, hopefully I'll provide some, I don't know if you want to say like tips or some information that might help the projects go a little bit smoother as we're going through the whole process of the construction process leading into special inspections, and then maybe how the submittal process takes place, if you want to say, if you, towards the end of the project. So, really special inspections were created. They're in a number of markets and states. I'd say the majority of the states have them in this kind of corridor, if you want to say. Wisconsin is one of the last ones that was kind of to adopt this program. The state of Indiana is in the same situation. They don't have necessarily a formal the special inspection, but a lot of the surrounding states already have stuff in place, and so a lot of it is to basically just to provide assurance to the owner that the plans and specifications are being met and followed in some capacity through portions of the project throughout the duration of the construction phase. So they've kind of come up with this, the state of Wisconsin has come up with the following: the International Building Code, the IBC, for special inspections, Chapter 17. Some states have their own designation or own code, but for Wisconsin, they actually follow the IBC that we go by. And
Good morning, Mr. Joel.
um, it, I guess Jennifer, can you
Everyone should be muted now. Oh, Mike, can you unmute yourself?
there
Am
you
I
go.
muted?
Perfect.
Yeah. All right.
Perfect.
Maybe I got muted by accident. Where did I leave off at? Did you hear anything, I guess, that I was just covering?
So, Mike, you're already past my slide, and I didn't get to say anything.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry about that. Um,
So you
let's
want to go
go.
back one?
Yeah, let's go up one. Oops. Yep. There you go. Fantastic. Good, Steve.
All right. So Mike and I are friends, but I'm going to tell you that we may disagree about the need for special inspections. And the reason that might be is because he's in a different field than I am as an architect and a builder. But ABC, as a disclaimer, has been fighting the implementation of Chapter 17 for as long as I can remember. Um, our members have not seen the cost benefit of Chapter 17 and special inspection. Um, and when we got the new code in 2021, that's when we also got special inspection, and it was a big surprise to a lot of us. So what do we do now? Mike obviously is a tester, an inspector. He sees the value in these things, and that's fine. Reasonable people can disagree. And the reason that we're having this webinar is so that the decision's been made. We lost the battle, and now we need to figure out how to do this. And Mike is the best qualified person I know of to tell us how to do it. He's an expert. He's got qualified credentials. He's professional. He's trustable, and his company, Intertech, has capacity. So that's what I wanted to say about this first thing is that if the members are going like, why is ABC pushing special inspections? We are not. We never have. We fought it for more than 20 years, and now we have it. So now what are we going to do? And that's why we're here today. We can go on now.
Yeah, and add to that too, Steve, is so the state and the local building officials, the jurisdictions, they've implemented this program, and as they've implemented it, we're responsible, if you want to say, on our side of the house to help support that. So that's kind of our role in the situation as well too. So if you look at some of the definitions within special inspections, we talk about you'll see it quite a bit. You'll see continuous. You'll see the word periodic, and it really identifies a couple of different things. So continuous pretty much is during that phase or portion of work that's being constructed. When continuous happens is when you have to be out there. The inspector will need to be there if you want to say for a full-time inspection. That's on a day-to-day basis. For an example of that would be like foundation installation. So typically foundations are a continuous inspection that's taking place. So as those foundations are excavated and cleaned up and reinforcing steel is placed and then concrete is placed, the inspector will need to be there each day that practice or procedure is being performed. So that's a continuous inspection. Now there's other things that they've identified as periodic, and that is just a partial. And that term periodic is very vague. It could be there 10% of the time, 25% of the time, 50% of the time. It really comes back to the jurisdiction on the local level of how much engagement that they want that periodic situation to entail. And usually those things are discussed at the beginning of the project, and I'll kind of get into some of those things a little later. But I wanted to give you an idea of what that is. And so, Steve, if you want to kind of add to this as well, too.
Yeah, so some of you have asked me, is Wisconsin going to write some Wisconsinisms that make this any easier for us in Wisconsin? Like we have a whole bunch of them, and why wouldn't we write some concerning special inspections since it's so onerous? And all I can say right now, none have been written. ABC's special lobbyist, legislative liaison John Scholze, is going to visit with the Department of Safety and Professional Services in July, and we are going to lobby for some Wisconsinisms for some relief, but we don't have any as of right now.
Okay. And then as we move forward through the application of the special inspections, so a lot of these items that can be identified, if you see here on the screen, and I know it's compressed and it's very tight to see, but typically you'll see the items that are listed for special inspections on like your S1 drawing. Typically they're in the structural drawings. They'll identify, if you want to say, a category. Those categories could be as listed there on the screen: fabrication, steel, concrete, masonry, and so forth. And then they'll identify what type of inspection needs to be performed, and that would be the format of it. Is it a continuous inspection or a periodic inspection? And then from there, that kind of identifies and highlights, if you want to say, what needs to be done at the given project site or your given project that you're working on. A lot of these items that are listed, or all the items that are listed, are identified in Chapter 17 of the IBC. It's if you want to say, it's a generalized clearinghouse to identify these situations. But these items that are listed as periodic and continuous, and I'll get into this a little bit later about identifying those, but those things are identified ahead of time, prior to the project starting, and it's in conjunction with what the jurisdiction needs on a local level, and then also what the designer would like to see within their given projects, if you want to say. So, Steve, if you got comments on that as well too.
Can you hear me?
I can. You look like your screen's frozen, but I
Yeah,
can't hear you.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So this is Jennifer. This is what I've been talking about is that I get frozen. So when I'm done with my comment on this slide, I'll have to join again. But anyway, what I wanted to say about this slide is that the Department of Safety and Professional Services has published what's called a guideline for special structural testing and inspections. It's actually a very useful document and it's available for free from them. I would show it to your owner to let them understand what is actually involved. Um, and Mike, I'd like you to answer one of my questions for the group, and that is, how do you develop an estimate after receiving this list that you just described? Because what we need to do is tell our owners what's the potential cost involved. And another part of that question is, do you need the working drawings? How close are your estimates? Do you need plans and specs? Do you need a construction schedule? What do you all need to develop an estimate for our members?
Yep, and I'll answer. So there's a couple different things. I would say the most important things that we can receive on our side of the house, any third party consultant, is the project plans and specifications. Because number one, like I said, it's going to show this on your S1 drawing. It also is going to identify that throughout your specification manual for your project. And then the other thing that we really, really would like would be the construction schedule of timeframes of individual items that are going to be constructed during the process. So, for an example, Steve, as the checklist, if you want to say, or identifying items are listed on what needs to be qualified as special inspections. And I want to hit that real quick as well, too, that I just said that. So inspections for a project site, whether it's a special identified as a special inspection, and special inspections are usually triggered around any type of life safety type of items, foundation, vertical decks, slab on grades, retaining walls. Things that are not listed as special inspections typically are like sidewalks and aprons and random site concrete. Those just become like a quality control or quality assurance that you've kind of seen over the years, if you want to say. So special inspections is just a more, if you want to say, a more structured process, and a little bit more detailed than just general inspections. But as we get those things, those drawings and the specs, and then the construction schedule, and then we know what the requirements are for the special inspections, whether it's a periodic, a continuous, and then what items need to be inspected, like concrete, soils, masonry, things like that. We can develop our timeframes, if you want to say, from the schedule that's provided by the contractor. And that really helps out, especially with like continuous items, as like, slab on grade things, foundations, maybe then you get into like part-time, it depends, or periodic with masonry, structural steel, things like that. And then that kind of helps guide us on how many visits that we'll need to make, if you want to say, and how engaged or how involved we'll be on the project. There are rule of thumbs that we typically use for types of projects. Um, if you get into a little bit more detailed projects, and the detailed projects I would say would be like medical facilities, K through 12 or higher education type projects. Sometimes, especially like automotive and manufacturing, there's a little bit more detail on those items. Those are a little bit more intense, if you want to say, and the cost for the inspections can be a little bit increased. I would say most inspections overall are about a 0.5% of just construction costs, not like equipment and X-ray machines or whatever it would be that would be put into the structure. But typical construction cost about a 0.5%. On some of the more in-depth inspections, like I said, the K through 12 medical things like that, they get closer to like 0.75% to like 1% of construction. Just to give you an idea, that's like a ballpark kind of range. But a lot of it really will be determined by the contractor's schedule. So if the contractor is going to have tight time frames and windows of how they're going to install their foundations or pour their slabs and things like that, it you could look at a slab area for an example. Well, there's 1,000 yards of concrete to pour. Well, we're going to pour that in, let's say, one pour, or we're going to pour that in four different pours and make it smaller. It We have to be out there for the inspections. So of course, it'd be a lot more beneficial to do the inspection as a one visit or two visit than it would be to be three or four visits. So that kind of just gives you an idea of like how that gets played out and how those estimates are done. And I'd say the estimates that we can create are probably pretty close to what is needed for the project. Like I said, it just helps give everybody an idea. Hey, this project coming up is going to be whatever, $20,000 for inspections, or it might be $200,000. It all depends on the scale of the project and the size and, a lot of the grading things like that, a lot of the soil applications or maybe types of foundations. If it's a deep foundation situation, driven piles, auger cast piles, caissons, things like that, or is it just a mat foundation or spread foundation or something like that? So those
Mike,
things come into play. Yeah, yeah,
we're hearing that the testing inspection community is overwhelmed.
yeah,
What's your opinion of your own company's capacity
yeah.
and in the industry's capacity to handle all these inspections?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with you. It is a bit overwhelming, and it really depends on market as well. So, like for Intertech PSI, we have an office in Chippewa Falls, we're in Kaukauna, we're in Ripon, and then we're in Waukesha, the greater Milwaukee area. And it really depends on what market you're in, is how heavy or how impactful the demand is. But I would tell you this, Steve, it feels a lot more intense. I think some of the things that have created that is just the unknown or the uncertainty of what special inspections are and how are they deemed to be involved with my project. I still think that there's some issues with clarity with that, if you want to say, but it has been a lot more engaging and a lot more intense this season, if you want to say, getting out of the winter and into the construction season. I'm sure that will probably calm down and settle down once everybody gets a little bit more comfortable with the situation. But right now, it's pretty tough. And what we're seeing too is, you know, there'll be larger impact projects that are in a given market. And I hate to say this, but some of the planning has not been the best. We have large scale projects that take time to develop scopes and all those types of things, and you have to have required individuals or certified individuals. We'll talk about that later, but it almost feels like in a way people don't really understand the process. So what happens is like, oh, we're going to start this project and it's going to be starting a week from now, and we need X, Y, Z of inspectors, and we want you here, and there's planning into it. So I would say to anybody on the phone, if you're managing a project, overseeing a project, you're in the beginning stages, preliminary stages, where you have not started construction, you really need to start thinking about special inspections and how it's held, and then how it's going to move forward, because that's going to help you with your planning on your project. Because the last thing you need to do is, oh, we'll use this consultant to do our special inspections, and you call them up and say, hey, we need someone tomorrow, come out here and do them, and they come back and they say, well, I don't have anybody available to help support the project. So there is that issue or situation that has come up. So it's a lot more intense. So I think Steve dropped off, I believe. So what I'll do is I'll kind of go to the next slide here. These next couple slides will kind of just give you an outline or an identification of what the form kind of looks like a little bit. Um, as you can see there, there's a listing of the item that of the inspection that would be required, if you want to say. Typically, it'll be checked where it says required, and then it'll also be checked on whether it's continuous or periodic. And so, like I said, some of those things will be continuous because it's the type of project that it is, and what the jurisdictional requirement is. And or it can be a periodic inspection as well, and that really depends on like I said, it depends on the type of inspection that's needed. And as you can see, there's detail to these items. It gives you a little bit of depth of what is needed. And I will get in a little bit later into the conversation here. I will get into it's the next topic. Jennifer, is Steve back on? Has he joined back in yet? Can you see?
Steve is back on. He just needs to unmute himself.
Okay, perfect. All right. So before I go to the next slide and cover that item, which is related to this, I'll have Steve make any comments or statements that he'd like to make or add to what we have up on the screen. I'll make a point for Steve. How about that? So in one of them, if you go up in here, like you get into soils, remember when you go through the IBC and the special inspection, the code, there are items in there that identify, do these, more or less it says, do these items need to be inspected and how often should they be inspected? There's a little bit of an outline. Mind you, that's determined by the designer later on, but there's a little bit of a code or an outline or a guide. And so sometimes, for an example, certain items do not need to be inspected under special inspections. It depends on the type of structure that it is, maybe a certain bearing capacity that has been identified for the foundations, the type of foundations that are being used. Sometimes there'll be, if you want to say, there'll be disclaimers where if there's a conservative approach to the project, it will kind of say, well, our bearing capacity requirement for this job is only, whatever, 1,000 PSF. Since that's a very conservative and low requirement, you're going to meet that requirement regardless. So that isn't part of special inspections that needs to be, categorized as a special inspection. Like I said, that's within the designer, and we'll get into those a little bit later on. But I want to kind of just that was one of Steve's comments to just give you guys a heads up, as there are items out there that are not requiring full-time or periodic inspections because they fit in a certain category that special inspections are not required for that given item. Okay.
And soils is one of them.
Yep.
We found, did you cover this, Mike, as I was
Yeah,
trying
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
reconnect it?
yeah. I was actually going over that and kind of filling them in on the soils comment and things like that. Yep.
Okay, I apologize for
Okay.
my lack of connectivity with Zoom. But what I wanted to ask you, Mike, is if an architect of record needs some help filling out that form that you put up on what
Yeah.
needs to be inspected,
Hmm.
is your company willing to help somebody?
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, and that's what we're going to get into actually, Steve, and I'll go to the um, whoops. Yep. Yeah. This is the next slide here. I'll get into the next item here, and it kind of fits with that. So yeah, we can definitely help if you want to say, hey, our stance is because the way this reads is so the way that the code reads is that the items that are identified and who retains the special inspector. So the way the code reads is the special inspector cannot work for the general contractor building the structure, right? It's a if you want to say in some capacity, it's a conflict of interest for them to retain the people that are going to do the inspections. And so the inspections have to be retained by the designer, owner, or owner representation. So owner representation can mean a couple of different things. It can mean an actual company that is an owner rep. It can also mean that it is identified as the architect is kind of considering and in being the lead of the project, taking that role on, if you want to say, on for the owner. They can be designated as like the owner rep. What they want to do is ultimately special inspections. They want the oversight of the inspector to be reporting or working directly for the owner because it reduces that conflict of interest with the contractor.
Well, let me
Yep,
just stop you there because
yeah,
here's
yep,
the
yep,
second time that Mike and I disagree.
yep,
And that's because many of you on the call are design build contractors, just like I am at Keller. And I can tell you that this is in the design build world. I think many of you will agree that our owners don't consider us to have a conflict of interest. They've hired us because they trust us and they want us to handle the entire process. They don't want to be involved with this and they consider it a bother. So I understand what Mike just said, and that's perfect coming from his seat. But coming from my seat, there was a lot of questions at the beginning of um, this special inspection implementation, and the state was confused, and some of you know the state is still confused. We have been getting mixed messages about who can sign this document or not. I can tell you that it's in your best interest to just let it go and go ahead and do is let the owner sign this document and forget this fight because there is no ultimate answer. We've been waiting since the code refresher for documentation coming out of the state to clarify this, because we have written documentation that says that we can have the builder's architect sign this. And I can just tell you that because there's been so much confusion on this subject, just do what Mike said and let the owner sign it, because I don't think it's worth it anymore to try to protect your owner from this onerous topic.
Yeah, and I think Steve, to add on that, so if you have a project that is like a design build project, th so on that when that happens, your builder, your architect, and your engineers, all those guys are like, if you want to say, on one team building this thing for the owner. It does. It becomes gray because I think both Steve and I have had experiences where the local jurisdiction says, yeah, whatever. Steve can hire you directly. That's fine because they're the architect or the designer as well. And then there's been other instances where they've come back and said, no, that can't work, and it's got to go through the owner directly. It's one of those gray areas. I think that they have not, formally defined as of yet. The way the code, like I said, the way the code's kind of written is it's supposed to go through the owner because they want that independent reporting and independent oversight, but it can make it complicated. I totally agree with you on that, Steve. And then the other comment that we have here on the screen is who identifies the special inspections, and that's where I wanted to get into. People like PSI and third party consultants and testers can kind of help and give you some guidance like, hey, per the code, or hey, typically on projects like this, we see these items that are identified as special inspections, and those things happen. And so the other thing that basically happens with that as well too is um, it becomes the designer of record, and that can be kind of a sticky situation because we've experienced this on a couple different levels as well too. So when we look at that, because it says these terms, it says the design professional or architect. Well, typically the structural engineer will identify the structural components of it. He'll talk about what periodic inspections he needs, what continuous inspections he needs. Those are based off of past experience, maybe the type of project that's being constructed or built, but it also is in relationship to the local jurisdiction or code that they've seen that in a past life. Well, hey, we built whatever. We built a church over here in this part of town, and we were required to do these things, and we're building another church on the other end of town, and we have to do these things. And I know that they're going to require these items in the special inspection code, so they'll add that to the listing if you want to say. So, but ultimately, it's supposed to come from the design professional or architect. So that form, if you want to say, gets created. Um, it usually goes from that phase to back to the jurisdiction and says, hey, these are the special inspections that we've identified. This is the format, whether it's periodic or continuous. Is this acceptable? Typically, the jurisdiction will come back and say, yeah, it looks good. Or they might say, hey, add these things, subtract these things. Then it gets sent over, if you want to say, to a company like mine with PSI. We fill out the form, because how we fill that out is we identify who the special inspector is for those items on that given job. And so what we do is we provide a name, maybe like a PE number or an ICC number or something in that nature. And that person is registered or identified as the inspector for that project. Then once that is complete, the designer and everybody submits that back with their drawings and prints to the state and says, hey, we're applying for a permit. Here's our special inspector. Here's the person that's going to be doing the inspections. Here's the inspections that need to be done. Uh, you know, here's our check to pay for the permit. And then the city basically says, hey, looks good. Here's your permit. Thanks for the payment. And then you guys go on with building your project, if you want to say. So,
Mike, recently,
yeah,
the Department of Safety and Professional Services sent out a bulletin and said, we understand how hard it is to find a special inspector. We get it. We know you got to get your plans submitted. When this all came out, it was required to have the special inspector listed on the form that you submit with the plans. The state said, all right, we'll give you some relief from that, and they currently are still allowing that relief, so you can get your plan submitted. But be
yeah,
careful. If you submit for an early start permit, you're going to be right back to needing that special inspector. So if you're not, then you maybe get a little extra time in finding a special inspector.
Yep. And I guess Steve, to this, and I think we're probably at that point too, because the inspections went into place, and I think it was originally supposed to be in October 1st, and they got moved to November 1st. These are any projects that the submittal process took place after November 1st. So we still have a couple jobs, if you want to say, that are out there on the streets that we're engaged with or involved with, where the project doesn't require special inspections because it was prior to that deadline. And then we have, of course, we have a number of projects that are after that deadline that are requiring special inspections now. So just to let everybody know. Okay. All right. On the next slide, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. There are exemptions within special inspections. A lot of it goes to like single family houses, greenhouses, barns, carport sheds, like if you want to say low risk, low type of structure. And then there's also some exceptions, like I mentioned earlier, if there's certain like bearing capacities or types of foundations that are needed for the given job, they're exempt from special inspections. And like I said, that's something I just want to bring it to your attention. You're more than welcome to go into like IBC, take a look at that, what that means. But I just want to give you an idea also that there are items that are out there that don't require that type of inspection. Okay. And then the other item here on the fabrication side of the house. So the way it kind of reads right now is if the fabricator for your project has a third party fabrication certification, there isn't a requirement to have fabrication inspections as materials are being constructed or made for a given project site. Now, mind you, I'm going to disclaimer that just a little bit as well too, because ultimately the structural designer or the local jurisdiction could ultimately come back and say, yeah, I understand that they have their third party quality cert, but I still want someone to go there and do an initial inspection, or maybe go do an inspection and check people's certifications, welding certifications, things like that. There can be some disclaimer to that. The other side also is if the fabricator does not have a quality program in place with a third party, there is a topic or a statement made that there can be fabrication inspections that need to be done at the plant. The one thing that I would tell you with is it really depends on the project, and it really depends on the jurisdiction that's managing the project. I have been involved with like large scale projects, like large football stadiums and things like that, where initially they said, "Hey, you know what? We're getting some trusses fabricated or rakers for this bowl that we're building, and we're fabricating them in wherever Charlotte, North Carolina, and we just want someone to go there and do an initial inspection, have some inspections, and then send someone there, have the inspections, and then materials come to the site." Typically, what happens is, as long as materials are coming to the site within the requirements or as the plans and specs require, there typically isn't a fabrication inspection. But if there becomes quality issues coming from the fabrication plant to the project site, then typically something will happen is someone will step in and say, "Hey, I really don't like what this fabricator's doing. They're not meeting our standards. Their welds don't look good. Maybe some things are missized, whatever it may be. We need to send a third party inspector to their shop and just verify that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing," kind of thing. So though that's kind of a little bit of both sides, but the way it reads, like I said, if you have a third party right now, you're not supposed to, you don't, it's not mandate that you have inspections. If you don't, there could be some inspections that are required. But I would tell you this, just dealing with this over the years, because this is, like I said, in different states, it's been around for a while. Typically, it's the local jurisdiction. They say, "Hey, whatever. Hey, builder, who's fabricating the steel for the project?" And you say, "Oh, it's XYZ." And it's like, "Oh, they had some issues on this other job. I'd feel comfortable if you guys make a couple visits prior to the job siting, or starting, or materials getting to the site. They might require you guys to do that on the front end, but just to give you an idea." Okay. And I think Steve had to jump off. I think he got locked up. But the other statement that
I'm
I'll make.
back.
Oh, there you go, Steve. Go
So,
ahead. You can
so
make it. Yeah, go
yeah, I
make
want
this.
to just,
Yeah.
my company has a steel fabrication shop. So when Mike talks about this, the certification, when this originally came out, we thought that we had to go get an AI certification from the American Institute of Steel Construction, which is a very onerous program to apply for and keep certified for. What we found out later is that there is a quality control process that meets the requirements that Mike just described, which is not onerous. And we were able to meet all of those requirements with our own quality control system that we already had in place. So we did not need to get our products inspected in our own steel shop. If you are a builder of pre-engineered steel buildings, they will have a AISC certification because they're sending their steel all over the state. And so you don't need to worry about that. What you should be concerned with is Mike just kind of described, if you're getting steel from somewhere else in the country and you've got to send inspectors there, obviously that's going to affect the price of your special inspection. So be aware of that, and I'm sure Mike will keep you out of trouble when you're doing estimating. But if you know that you're getting components from Timbuktu, let let your inspector know that when they're giving you an estimate.
Yeah, because it plays into it because it might be a they might have already told the builder ahead of time, hey, we want these things done. Maybe that might not get relayed back to the third party, and then there's additional costs that are taken with that with if if it's a remote area with travel, things like that. But yeah, absolutely, Steve. All right, so we're going to go into the next phase. And so the next phase here are like the special inspections and the procedures, and these are some of the most popular, if you want to say, topics that we get involved with. And it really is how it's integrated in probably most project sites. So like I mentioned earlier, any of those life critical type of scenarios, that you can get involved with if there's a soils issue, a foundation issue, a structural concrete issue, that becomes, like I said, part of special inspections, in that they can be identified as periodic or continuous. Like I said, it depends on the project, but a lot of things like for soils, for an example, we'll do in-place density tests. We'll do stability tests, and that would consist of like a proof roll. We'll do moisture content to make sure the moisture content of the soil that's being applied or filled on the site is within range. And then also like proper lift size. Is the contractor putting in a loose 12-inch lift or whatever the requirement is, or are they doing it like 3 feet at a time, which is, potential for settlement and things like that later on. So those are types of things that we inspect on the pure foundation or foundation side of the house. We'll look at the reinforcing steel. We'll look for cleanliness of the excavation or the drilled shaft. We'll make sure that there's water not at the base. That the sides are not loose, they're stable, things like that. And then as we get into concrete, which is the most popular inspection that takes place, um, it gets into basic concrete quality control aspects. Time durations from the plant to the site of discharge. It gets into, is the proper mix being used? What was the air content of the concrete? What is the slump of the concrete? What is the temperature of the concrete? And then we cast samples or specimens, the break and the compressive strength, the strength later on. Like I said, those things are typically cast the given day that they're done, and then they're picked up the following day, and then they're transported back to the laboratory. So you have a day of curing, and then they go back to the lab, and then they get kind of logged and recorded, and then they get broken on whatever days are required. If it's a post-tension structure, you'll see like a lot of 1, 2, 3 day breaks. If it's more of a traditional structure, you typically see like 7 day breaks, and then ultimately the strength is required on a 28-day strength. And if there's low breaks, there's a number of ways to look at those items, but then you can go in like 56-day breaks, things like that. Okay.
Jennifer, I see a bunch of questions coming in. Are we keeping track of those so that we can deal with them at the end of the presentation?
I sure am.
All right,
Okay.
perfect. One
Perfect.
question I have on this slide, Mike,
Yeah.
is with all this continuous testing, it just boggles my mind that you'd have enough people to be on these job sites for
Yeah.
that amount of time. Are you actually able to handle this with your current manpower?
Yeah, and so the thing about it is, I would say that the way it's handled, Steve, is of course there's going to be a number of jobs that have overlap. There's but other jobs that are like staged, other jobs are more into the job, so the intensity or the amount of visits has reduced, and so we might have an inspector on a job site every day, all day. And then other jobs, we might go to two, three, four jobs in a given day. We might cover a concrete pour at 8 in the morning, go cover masonry. Let's just say if it's a small pour, go cover masonry inspections at 11, and then maybe go do whatever soil compaction test at 3 in the afternoon type of thing. So yeah, the schedule is critical, and we're going to get into some of those communications and discussions towards the end of the presentation. But yeah, Steve, like I mentioned earlier, it's not normal right now. It's very intense. There's a lot of things happening at once, and it does create problems in the industry. Yep.
And speaking of the industry, let's say that you guys are handling it and everything's good with your company because of your size. But I'm hearing that the impact of continuous inspection is causing project delays where contractors can't do the pours because there's not an inspector available to do the observation. Are you hearing that?
I do hear that some, and I'll tell you. So the way it's set up in different states as well too. Sometimes if like the third party consultant is not able to make the pour on a given schedule, uh, and I hate to say it, it's like ready mix suppliers. If there's large projects in that ready mix supplier area, they can't cover they can't batch and dispatch trucks all at the same time. So some jobs are starting early in the morning, some jobs might be normal morning, if you want to say, some jobs might be at the end of the day. And so there is a lot of communication that's going on with scheduling. And, those are some of the hurdles that we've faced dealing with the jurisdictions and what needs to be inspected or what can be inspected, things like that. Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Concrete inspections, as we get into this, is just a little bit more detailed on some of those items. Reinforcing steel, typical inspections are spacing, number of bars, size of bars, clearances. Those are type of inspections that are done. And the one thing I'll tell you, at least within PSI, our inspections, we have, if you want to say, a form or a format for every inspection that we do. So we provide inspections. For soil compaction, that's done in a certain manner, and that's a form, if you want to say. Concrete inspections, that's a certain form, and there's things that we identify on it. It's fill in, if you want to say, it's more of fill in the blank items, and it's not more or less like a written write up of, oh, I inspected 5 trucks today, and the slumps were 5, 6, 7, 8, or whatever. It's nothing like that. It's more of a tabular form, if you want to say, a checklist form. That's what this makes it easier for our staff to handle, and that's what we've created. And then if you go into the structural steel inspections, that might look into, as I mentioned earlier, like the welder certifications. We had a job that came up, honestly, that's driving deep foundations, and one of the requirements for special inspections were to inspect the welder certifications. Well, when we looked at the welder certifications, they only had certifications to build to weld like bridge components or bridge beams and things in that nature. And they didn't have one for structural components of like a vertical construction of a building. And so that was a bit of a hang up, and there had to be clarification provided for that. And then when you look at some of the steel, it's, bolted connections, look at visual welds. There might require some type of UT inspections. Um, you know, all those types of things that go into doing general oversight. I would say a lot of the steel inspections are going to be periodic. An erector is on a site. If you want to say, he erects or sets like 2 bays of the building, we maybe come out and do an inspection, identify maybe some issues that we see, and then they start continue to erect the structure. And that just makes it easier. So you don't erect the entire building. There's an issue at the very beginning, and then there's issues later on. So usually it's like it can turn into like, oh, we'll come out this week and 2 weeks from now, or in 3 weeks from now, or whatever it may be. That's usually kind of what you see.
Mike,
Um,
I'd like to talk a little bit about bolted connections.
yes, sir.
Recently, within a week ago, we got a bunch of mixed messages about bolted connections, and what I took out of it was that conventional steel and pre-engineered metal building steel all need inspection as far as the bolted connections.
Hmm.
Cast in place anchor bolt connections, they need inspections.
Yeah.
Expansion bolt connections, they need inspections. And my question is, what is the definition? First of all, Mike, the first question is, do you agree with what I just said? And my second question is, what is the definition of snug tight bolts? And do snug tight bolts need inspection?
You- you're there. You're unfrozen, it looks like now.
Mike,
Did
you're
did you
back. You're good.
did you hear
Okay.
my question?
I couldn't tell. Was that me or was that on your end? I'm sorry. There was a glitch in the. I couldn't hear anybody. I couldn't hear your question.
You could, okay.
Yeah, sorry about
So
that.
did you hear anything about bolted
Yeah,
connections?
the lead up, you said, hey, there's bolted connections, and then the jurisdiction was telling you to have, what they would like to see, I think, is what you were getting to.
Well, yeah. So I don't want the group to have to listen to me again. So
Okay.
why don't you just let me know what your definition of snug tight bolts are, and do snug tight bolts need inspection?
Yeah, so snug tight bolts are typically, as you erect a structure, you're the goal is to have a bolt in the opening or in the connection, and that sometimes that becomes an issue sometimes because they're erecting the structure, they're getting it plumb, they're getting it level, they're doing all their items, and sometimes not all bolt holes are filled at the moment of the initial erection. So typically what happens in the bolted connection inspections, typically they'll identify a percentage. They'll say, hey, there needs to be 10% of the connections need to be inspected. And so basically, and it can be one of two things. We can go around with a wrench to ensure that they're tightened bolts, or you can actually go in and have a wrench that's calibrated to the torque or torsion that's needed, and basically run those in tension on the connection to see if it meets the requirements of the project. A lot of that, Steve, I'll be honest with you, is going to be through the local jurisdiction, and it's going to be through the structural designer who identifies that and what their interpretation of those items are. That's usually how it comes into play.
Okay, so now we're listening to chapter 17, we're listening to the local building inspector, we're listening to the structural engineer, and we're listening to our special inspector. So
Well,
now you
yeah,
understand why this is so confusing to us.
yeah, totally understand. Totally understand. The chapter 17 is the guide for the process. Okay. Ultimately, the local's jurisdiction, the governing body, like the building department, the public official, they are the ultimate authority. They use the IBC as a guide for them to manage their projects and oversee their projects. They are working in conjunction with the structural engineer to what is required in the design. So let's say, for an example, and this is a good example, Steve. Say we go to a site and we find a deficiency, and we write up a report that says there's a deficiency. The structural engineer is going to go look at that deficiency and say, is what was done, does that meet the standard of what I was trying to accomplish on my project or on my structure? And he's going to look at it, he or she's going to look at it and say, you know what, it does. It meets the requirement. And this could go like concrete strength. Let's say there's a 4,000 psi concrete strength, and for some apparent reason, it only meets 3,800 psi. He could look at it and say, yep, it's within tolerance. There's a quote unquote, there's a deficiency, but he's accepting it. He goes then, that gets submitted to the city or jurisdiction at that point, and they ultimately can say, yeah, I agree with you. Or they can come back and say, nope, I don't agree with you. I don't believe in that.
So
So
have
all
any of these local inspectors been trained at all?
that I don't know. That's not a question for me to answer.
So usually there's some cooperation between the state of Wisconsin and local building officials. If the state of Wisconsin is reviewing special inspections and the local inspector is observing them, you would think that the two would train each other on these things.
Yeah. And mind you, I would just make the point is, I don't think anybody's trying to purposely, if you want to use the term of like shut down a job or find the item non-compliant. I think that if there's a concern, it's going to be brought to their attention. I would assume in most cases that they're going to accept the designer's acceptance of the item that might be identified as a deficiency. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Rarely slash never have I seen the jurisdiction saying, "Oh, I'm overriding the designer's thought process on this, and you can't proceed, or I won't give you your permit." I don't think I've seen that very often, if not ever. Just so you know. All right. Can you? I guess Jennifer, can you hear me? It looks like Steve's frozen.
I can hear you. Yep, I think we
Oh,
lost
okay.
you again.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next page because it kind of just gives you a little bit more depth of the inspections. Now, this is masonry inspections. It gets into a lot of things. Are the grout cells, are they grouted? Is reinforcing in place? You know, is there a proper lift size being used for grouting of a wall so it can identify that the grout has moved down the wall and has filled all the cells? I'll be honest with you. We had an issue the other day on a project where we were not called out for the inspection. The wall was placed and built. The contractor took some photos of what was being placed and what was being built. It goes into the example that I just gave Steve. Ultimately, we can't say that the wall was built per plans and specs because we weren't there to see it. Ultimately the designer is going to look at it and say, I've seen these photos. I went out into the site, let's just say, I inspected the wall. I feel comfortable. It becomes an RFI situation on a given project site. And then they write a response to the RFI that says, we deem the wall acceptable. That's typically kind of what would happen on any type of deficiency, if you want to say. So masonry walls, like I said, that's one of the inspections. And then we get into some of these other items that you've seen more popular, or you've seen them over the time where they've come into play a little bit more, is the fireproofing, spray-on resistant fireproofing material. We'll take samples for density and thickness and application, and make sure the sample is or the steel is prepared properly prior to application. We'll record like bond strength, and you get into basically like the condition of the material. Sometimes you have an open structure when you're applying this material. Sometimes the material can get washed away on a heavy rainstorm or something like that. So that becomes an item, and usually what happens, they just go back and reapply it in those given areas. And then we see a lot of this fire stopping and smoke containment. It's basically filling gaps or voids throughout the structure. You'll see a lot of this type of inspection, if you want to say, in like multifamily construction, where there's unit to unit to unit. The goal here is to fill all voids with caulking or foam or whatever it may be, to block any type of fire or smoke penetration into the nearby structures. And so that's typically what you see on these type 2 inspections. Okay. And then these are basically the general qualifications of the inspector that have been identified by the state of Wisconsin. It gets into a couple different things. You have the inspector can either be certified, or there can be like a apprenticeship type of thing where you have someone that might not have the certifications that is being overseen by someone who obtains or retains those certifications. We've seen a lot of leeway in that type of response just because, as Steve was mentioning earlier, there's just not enough staff to cover the amount of inspections. And then the rollout of this program where it kind of came into effect, let's say middle of last summer, and the ramp up to try to get people certified and trained. So you might have an inspector that's very knowledgeable of the inspections that needs to be done, but maybe he hasn't completed, I don't know, his ICC masonry inspection is one of the requirements, but he might be working with or being overseen by someone who obtains that, and then they can kind of work through that situation where that can get signed off at. It'll probably take, and I think what's happening right now, the local jurisdictions understand that, and they've been pretty forgiving, if you want to say, as long as they're notified ahead of time. And then if there's any deficiencies that we bring them to the table. Um, and it just gives you a little rundown of each one. So there's third-party certifications for every type of application, whether it's fireproofing, masonry, concrete, soil, steel, reinforcing steel. And then, of course, you have state registrations like PEs or like a national registrations like CWIs and things like that that look at steel.
Can you hear me, Mike?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Steve. Yep.
Okay, so one of my pet peeves is acronyms. So I looked up some of these that I didn't know. I
Yeah.
already said one was the American Institute of Steel Construction.
Yep.
Some people may not know that PE stands for Professional Engineer. I didn't know what AWS was. Apparently, that's American Welding Society.
Correct.
ASNT is American Society for Non-Destructive Testing. I wasn't sure about ICC. I think it's the
Yeah.
International Code Council, but I also found
Yeah.
out that there was a internally cured concrete institute. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
ACI is American Concrete Institute. I didn't know about NICET. It's the National Institute for Certification in Engineering Technology. I wasn't aware of TMS, the Masonry Society.
Yep.
And then ABET is the Accreditation Board for Engineering Technology.
Yep.
So,
Yeah,
uh,
there's a number of like associations out there or governing bodies, Steve, that we use to be approved, and a lot, like I said, a lot of this is also provided to um, contractors and consultants and alike via the Wisconsin website. They have like a listing of what the individuals can be. I'd say the most common ones that you'll see, of course, is a PE for professional engineer. ICC is very popular. It's the International Code of Council, which is basically you can get reinforcing steel and concrete and soils and you name it. You can get a lot of certifications to that. It's a third party provider that provides, if you want to say there's training that's involved with it, there's examinations that's involved with it, and then sign off and certification.
so
So those,
question I have, Mike, is
yeah.
that let's say that Chapter 17 may reference a standard, and let's say they reference a standard in the American Concrete Institute. Um, in American Concrete Institute will have some standards for the construction of that product. Which one do you follow? Do you follow Chapter 17 or do you follow the industry standard?
So chapter 17 will identify that the person has to deem to have experience in the field of trade. Okay. And so what they do is that will go back to the state of Wisconsin, who has identified a listing of what certifications they will accept. So that's how that's handled. What is accepted is the project plans and specifications. So that's how the permits are generated. So the designers will come up with a listing of materials and things to be used, and there's validation of these materials and submittal process that is being used. Once that is submitted and approved by local jurisdiction by you getting your permit, that's what governs it. So that's why it's under the each project plan and specifications that manages the project. The only time that you'll see maybe where there might be a gap or a conflict is sometimes project plans and specifications will identify things for soils that need to be taken care of. But then on the flip side, it might also say, please refer to the geotechnical report that was performed by XYZ on this date, and that will be the governing body, if you want to say, for the soil portion of the project. But all in all, Steve, it goes back to the plans and specifications, just so there's no misunderstanding, and it provides a clear direction to the contractor or whoever it may be, so they understand what requirement they're building this to, if you want to say. Okay. All right. And then like I said, these get into the qualifications. Like I said, it kind of identifies and it gives you experience. It'll give you, hey, they have to whatever have a high school education, so many years of experience, and then they could be they have to go to accredited, which is an ABET university, accredited university, and construction management or civil design or civil engineering. It will get into those types of things. It'll say that the person can be a PE, but like this here, for an example, this is just a pull right from the state of Wisconsin. And I just wanted to share that with you. It kind of identifies how the qualifications of the inspector have to be met for the project.
Yeah, Mike, and there's a 6-page document that DSPS has published
Yep.
for those minimum qualifications, and you can get that from them. One question I had is, wh how much notice does your staff need for a basic inspection? How much
So
ahead of time do we need to give
yeah,
them?
so we kind of talked about that, Steve, when we were going through the estimate a little bit when you had to jump off. But what it comes to is if you have knowledge of the project, number one, that you're going to be building this project and you need to have a third party inspector, you need to engage with the third party company as soon as possible. They need to be number one, you need to more or less come to them and say, "Hey, I've got this project coming up. Can you bid on this project and accept it?" And we're in the same position that any builder is in. Not one builder can't build every building in a city. So we're in the same position. So we will, just like a contractor, we bid on certain jobs, we don't bid on other jobs just because it becomes a demand of people and amount of staff of people that we have. But once you have that person engaged, the initial we'd like to see like, hey, we're going to be starting construction in about a week and we wanted to give you a heads up. That's really important to us. That's great. But as we lead up to that inspection, we typically require at least 24 at 48 if you can give it. Like, hey, Friday morning we're going to be placing concrete. We'd like to know about that at minimal by like at least noon the day prior, or at least the day prior to that. At least giving us a heads up or putting us on the schedule. And we don't mind either on the backside is if you call us on Thursday morning, let's say for an example, and say, hey, we're going to be pouring concrete tomorrow at 10 a.m. at my job site. No problem. We get you in the schedule. You call us at 2 o'clock and say, hey, you know what? We didn't get as far as we thought we'd get. We're moving this back till noon, or hey, we're moving this back to Monday. No problem. Then we can redirect and put those technicians on another job site. So yeah, we the sooner the better, Steve, basically. And I would just caution anybody, like you said, all contractors, all suppliers, all consultants, all testers, they're all in that same bucket. As soon as you kind of know your schedule, you got to start communicating that information to the individuals.
Thank you.
Yep. And then when we go over to here, and that's really what we just kind of covered, um, it's important. I would tell you this, the more successful a project is, the better communication that took place on that project. There needs to be communication started from the very beginning. There needs to be, if there's a deficiency, who do we need to tell and when do we need to tell them? How do we log or track those deficiencies? We have this example up here on the screen here. We use something very similar to this. We go out to a job site. There's a deficiency that day. Let's just say it's a soil compaction test that doesn't pass, or maybe we went out to do a steel inspection and the deck wasn't welded to the joist, or there's bolts missing. We log that so we can track it. So the next time the inspector is there or the next step action is there. So number one, we're recording it, we're identifying it, we're letting the field team know. We're letting everybody know that, hey, there's a deficiency and it needs to be closed out because we really need to provide that closure to it or tracking of it because the last thing that we want to do is have an issue that there's a deficiency out there. We get to the end of the project and someone calls PSI and says, "Hey, we need a closeout letter that says our foundations were built per plans and specs." And then we go back in and we find out that I don't know, maybe there was a failed foundation of some sort in the inspection, and it never got addressed. I mean, that's an extreme case that won't happen, but I'm just saying it just helps track and guide that just so everybody's on the same page. So
Mike, I got a couple
yeah,
of questions
yeah.
about that. So again, some acronyms there that I never saw that one with starts with PS. Apparently, that's a quality management system that I'm going to look up. Then
Yeah,
the
it's yeah,
storage of,
and Steve, with that real quick, that's just our system. It's a PSI Quest. It's our field system, so all of our technicians can, do their inspections from a phone or a tablet. It's just part of our format.
okay,
It's just our internal system, and that's how so our guys will type them in the field, or maybe they might go back and take hand notes and then go back that night and type them into the system.
so
Our
it's
project
proprietary.
Yeah, yeah, correct. And then then our project managers and managers, whoever our quality people oversee those reports. They review them, they release them, and then they can get released to any of the team members at the job site. Typically the soils contractor is not going to want to know anything about the concrete test. Maybe the concrete guy doesn't want to know anything about steel or whatever it may be. And so we can just distribute those reports to whoever is needed at the given time. Or we can give you can get all reports and get some reports. It all depends on the way it's set up.
So,
Yep.
Mike, there's a lot of questions about reporting, and
Mhm.
one of them is does the special inspector submit the reporting log to the local inspector first or to the structural engineer first?
Yeah. So reports. So when you get up, that's part of the communication on the project setup. When you go to your project and you have your kickoff meeting or your start meeting, one of those topics is going to be special inspections. The question that should be asked by the designer and whoever's involved with the project, who needs to receive reports in contact information, name, email, all those things. Those reports as they get typed up, reviewed, and released, they get sent to the team members. Um, there's a so that happens on a if you want to say like a day-to-day basis that takes place. The next phase is how do we get like closeout letters for each of the sections so we can get close our permit out or get a permit closed out or receive a permit. And what we do is so we will write a letter, like I gave an example earlier. We might write a letter for all the soils work that was performed. And we say, hey, all the soils were placed per plans and specs. We send that letter to the designer and engineer record, the people that identified the special inspections from the very get-go that we covered. They get that information. They basically format or tabulate a response, and then they turn that into the local jurisdiction. We provide the data to our client, the in slash owner slash designer. The designer needs to collect all that data and do the final submission to the state directly. A third party or PSI, they're not responsible for submitting that. That's part of like the
So then,
permit
is it true
application.
that the architect of record cannot do a compliance statement or an occupancy filing until all of these logs have gone past his desk?
I would say yes, but I'll put a disclaimer on that. I don't know how an architect would write up a scenario or write up a closeout letter that says everything was built per plan and specs if he has not reviewed the plans, the reports that were coming from the field. Could he write that letter? Ultimately, write that letter and turn it in? And could the state say, "Yep, that looks good to me," and give you a permit? I guess that could happen, but I just don't know how the architect could write that letter without having the supporting documents. So that's the statement I'll make.
So, one of the questions I've run into is who's responsible for keeping all of these records and filing them post job and having them available if somebody wants to see them. Is
Mhm.
that the architect of record? Is that your testing agency? Is that the state? Who's responsible, or is everybody required to keep the log?
So we keep records for 7 years. And if the project requires it, we'll keep them for 10. It all depends on what the requirements in the project are. Typically in your plans and specs, it'll kind of identify that. But ultimately, if I'm the designer, I'm keeping that information so I have it as backup. And if I'm the local jurisdiction and I'm reviewing these items to release a permit to that given designer or contractor, I'm keeping those on file because I want to go back if something would ever come down the road. I don't know if there's like a law or a statement that says, they have to be retained by this person this long. But I would think the individuals involved with it and as a company like we keep them on file. So
So since most of the our attendees today are likely to be contractors, I have some suggestions for them
yeah.
that we have learned since the inception of this special inspection, and that is to invite Mike or somebody like Mike to your pre-construction meeting. Invite your architect of record, maybe even invite your building inspector. And this slide is all about communicate so that you have a plan. Maybe you're going to be phasing your project, so let your inspector know that. And then make the special inspector an integral part of the construction process. Um, Give the special inspector your schedule. Um, let's not make those kinds of things secretive. A special inspector is going to do those submittals. Is anybody else making submittals to the local official, Mike?
No, the local official, put it this way, if the project at the very beginning, when we have this, let's say we have a kickoff meeting and they say, hey, Mike, we want you guys to supply these reports to these people. And one of those individuals is like the local building department, because we do that. We'll send them the reports, but those are just daily field reports. When there's a closeout letter or a certification letter, that just goes from us to the designer, and then the designer would then submit it to the building department, if you want to say it that way.
Some people have asked me that since you're involved as a special inspector, does the local inspector still need to do all of their normal inspections? What do you say to that question?
It honestly, it's up to the jurisdiction. We've seen it where they said, "Oh, who's going to be here?" And they said, "Oh, PSI is going to be on the site." And they said, "Okay, I'm good with that. We've worked with them in the past. Just have them send me copies of reports." Then we've been in other jurisdictions that say, "Okay, PSI is going to be here, but I don't care. I still want to be called for the pours and the placements or the erection or electrical, whatever it may be." And that happens. So it really depends. I would say probably most of the people, as long as there's a third party involved, that they'll accept that. But I wouldn't say that that's the case every time. You need to clarify that at the very beginning. And Steve, you made a great point. You have these kickoff meetings. You're going to have the designer there. You're going to have the contractor there, and you're going to have a representative from the building department there. I think that's a key thing, because what you don't want to have happen is you think you know what you're doing, or you think you know what you have to submit, and then you get down the line and then the building department comes back to you and says, well, hey, what happened to this? Why is this taking place now? And then you don't, if you want to say, you don't have an answer for that, and that creates a problem. So I think if you have them there from the very beginning, it makes things go a lot easier. And that's what this slide shows that we have up here now. Just and make sure you have a point of contact. It's key that we know this, have the schedule, but we also need to be scheduled to come to the site. The things that, and I'll be honest, and this goes with anybody, any consultant, you can't make a statement, if you want to say, that says, "Oh, we're going to be placing concrete in the next 2 weeks. You need to be here then." I think it needs to be very specific. We're placing concrete on Tuesday at 10, and we need to have a representative here. It has to be very specific, and there has to be a designated person that is required to make those calls and schedule the inspector. Because if you don't schedule the inspector, it can't come down to like, "Oh, hey, I forgot to call you. We poured the other day. You guys got to write a report that says everything was okay," because like that's not going to happen. So you got to make sure that you designate someone that schedules the inspector, that has the inspector on site. Okay. And I think Jennifer, I think Steve jumped off or got
I'm
bounced off, I
back.
think. Oh, there you go. Okay. Okay. All right. So Steve, we were just talking about like that communication with scheduling and making sure that the contractor schedules it. It needs to be very specific during that scheduling process. It needs to be a day, a time that we need to be there. Typically what happens is the contractor will call us up and say, "Hey, Mike, I need you here tomorrow. We're going to pour at noon, and we're going to pour 175 yards of exterior concrete." So we know off the bat we're going to need to test the concrete for slump air temperature, make sets of cylinders. We're going to need to make 3 or 4 sets of cylinders, depending upon what the spec is. It gives us a debrief to call us up and say, "We're going to pour whatever Wednesday concrete," and that's the message. It has to be. It's great. We need to know yardage, time you're going to place, all those things. And it helps us with scheduling, because we know if we're only covering 8 yards of concrete, we're only going to be there probably like an hour, maybe 2 hours. But if there's 800 yards of concrete, we know we're going to be there for 10 to 12 hours or whatever the number is. So, okay. All right. And that concludes the presentation. And I guess we have a little bit of time here for question and answer. So I guess if there's questions out there,
Yeah,
I don't know
Mike,
how. Okay.
I'm gonna attempt here to share the chat box.
Okay.
I'll make it a little easier for everybody. Let me see. Did that
I can,
work?
we
Can I?
can see your LinkedIn. There's someone's LinkedIn tab that's up right now. It looks like. I think that
Wait,
says LinkedIn.
let's try. Let's try that again. Selecting this screen. If not, we can just.
And let me click stop sharing on my end. I don't know. I know in Teams you don't need to stop sharing and someone can just take control, but let me do that just in case. There you go.
All right, let's try this one more time. Otherwise, we'll just read them off.
Okay.
Let's try.
Obviously, my laptop doesn't like Zoom, so don't
Right.
don't, don't rely on me.
How about that? Anything from chat come up?
No,
No.
it just says ready when you are, and there's like an entry to kind of show.
All right. Well, then I will just read them off. So let me start with the first one here. And some of these I think we you guys answered, so we'll kind of
Yep.
go through those quickly. But what if there's a conflict of interest between plans, special inspection requirement sheet, and how structural engineer designer of record interprets the project and how the special inspector interprets the project?
Yeah. So here's what I tell you is we're the special inspector that performs the inspections. We don't determine what inspections get performed and how they get performed. So if the structural designer or the design engineer states that this is what's needed, then that's what we follow. It gets into a point, if you want to say, that it turns into a test and report situation. So we're the inspector. We're not the designer or the jurisdiction that would manage that or govern that. So if that's what they want, that's what we would do. They could come back to us and say, yeah, I know that the spec requires you to whatever test concrete every 50 yards, but I don't want it tested for every 100 yards. And the building official says, yeah, I'm fine with that. That's the way it goes. Then we just test it every 100 yards and we move on with our lives at that point. So, yep, no big deal.
Okay.
Yep,
Next one was what credentials does a special inspector need? I think you covered that.
yep.
Someone also dropped that DSPS link into the chat, so everybody can find that there. So we'll jump to the next one. Does the fabrication inspections also apply to wood trusses or penalized walls?
Yeah, so the wood trusses, it definitely does. In the like the I guess panelized walls are referring to like a precast panel kind of thing. I assume that that's what that is. That would be the same. And we like I said, we as a company have done inspections at the fab shop for mostly precast in steel. Usually the wood trusses are typically just inspected in the field, and a lot of that is size of member, size of connection, like bolt inspections, and those types of things that get done. They can. I would tell you this unless there's really a problem with the fabricator or you're on a really like high profile specific project, you don't see a lot of fabrication inspections. You just don't. It'll call for it, but you just don't see that often, put it that way.
Okay.
Yep.
Another one on fabricator approval. Does it have to be AISC certified? There looks to be limited AISC certified fabricators. Will there be other agencies certified? We have many companies that are ASIC compliant but not certified. If we don't need the certification, how does a general contractor and owner know we won't need to review their quality controlled on site with a special inspector?
So I'd like to
Yeah.
start with that one and Mike can finish. We
Yep.
thought that we had to be AISC certified. We found out that with our quality control program, we didn't need to be.
Yep. And I'd say the same thing, Steve. And I think you really just go back to your building department and say, hey, we got a fabricator. He's got these credentials. Let's, whatever they are. Is this acceptable? And your building department's going to guide you at that point. They're going to say, yeah, we're fine with that, as you're applying for your permit at that point.
All right, next one is are contractors still hiring their own inspection company or simply passing along the inspections and costs that we would typically do to the owner?
Yeah. And that's one of those gray areas. I would say this. Um, we are on projects where the general contractor will hire us to do quality control, and it's just random inspections tests to support it. And then there's a special inspector that's on site for the owner. Um, I think that goes at the very beginning of the job, and almost what Steve had mentioned earlier, because Steve, if you want to say, has been told two different ways, like yes, they can or no, they can't. And I think what you do is you go back to your building official and say, hey, I'm retaining the testing on this. Is this acceptable for this project? And they're going to tell you yes or no at that point. I think that's really where it's going to go down to because, like I said, the state has told Steve and others, if you want to say, in some capacity, kind of both sides of the fence, and it kind of leaves it gray. I can tell you this, the way that the code reads, it's supposed to be the owner representation. So that's what I'd tell you. I would try to set that scenario. And the one thing I will tell you, add to that, is the contractors um, have been engaging with us as PSI and saying, hey, provide me a price or a quote for this job. We do. And then what they've been doing is kind of separating that from their cost and going to the owner and say, hey, you need to have an inspection company per the Wisconsin requirement. Um, I can retain them, you can retain them, but here's their quote and here's their cost. And so they've been kind of helping out or preparing that owner for that. But I think
And in an
ultimately,
effort to help that owner out
yeah,
and prepare for that is for you design builders at ABC, my suggestion is to make it as easy as possible for your owner who's expecting care of everything is still take care of everything. Do the you know, have your owner pay for the work by the special inspector, but do all of the legwork for your customer so that they are not burdened by this process.
yeah. And with that, Steve, and you and I talked about this privately, like I think it's not formatted enough yet. There's not enough that's gone around. We haven't been exposed to this. I don't think that there's anybody trying to conduct a witch hunt, if you want to say in some capacity. I think as long as you have communication on your given job with the building department, you say, hey, we're trying to work through this. How do you guys want to see this? How do you want to? They're going to work with you on it. I don't think that they're gonna, I mean, listen, they could do anything they want. I don't think they're gonna turn around and say, "Oh, it's your problem. You figure it out and do these things." I think they're gonna try to help support you in any way and maybe give you advice on what they want to see. Because, like I said, ultimately they're the final ones that have to sign off on it, and they probably need to be specific with you during the application process so you know what the expectations are. I mean, that's really where we're going with it. So.
All right, great. We'll hop to the next one. I'm doing a wood-framed bank in Green Bay, single story, no structural steel, and no special inspections are needed. I am doing a wood frame mini storage on grade beam foundation, and we need special inspections for soil and concrete. Why is there a difference on special inspections for these two projects? Seems inconsistent, or is the architect driving this?
I don't know. I would say it's probably a jurisdictional thing potentially, or it could be the designer that's driving it. I don't know enough to maybe answer that. I'm guessing it's one of the two. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Do fire rated rooms need to be inspected? Does intumescent paint need to be inspected?
Yeah. Intumescent paint is typically one of those items with the fire stopping, fireproofing inspections, and they'll list that on the sheet. So there'll be those type, and typically it's for coverage, thickness, things like that. And so yeah, usually those are the items that are required. They'll identify that. Yep.
When
Can I
you're inspecting of like a fire rated room, are they just looking at penetrations or are they actually looking at the wall to make sure it's got the proper rating?
They'll do it'll be two things. It could be both. That's typically what we see, but that will be identified through the designer what they're looking for in that. They'll identify what they need. Yep.
All right. Next question. Can I hire a third-party licensed professional structural engineer to do special inspections?
You could. Um, you could, yeah. I mean, as long as he meets the requirements of the state and all those things, and he's a third party, I would assume that would work.
Okay.
Yep.
Does the firm that does geotechnical report need to be the special inspector?
No. Nope. There's no connection there. Sometimes it works out that way. Sometimes it doesn't. We're on both types of projects. Sometimes we're the geo and we do the testing, and then other times we do the geo and we don't get the testing. It really is open end. It could be either way. It's not required.
All right, last question in the chat, and then we've got about 5 more minutes for anybody who wants to pop in. But when a special inspection is done, where do the reports need to go? For example, if you did a soil compaction verification under a footing, where does that report go, and what is the timing if there are multiple visits and reports for footing inspections? Who is required to get them?
It would be up to the designer who receives the copy of the reports from our field activities that they want. Sometimes the designer might say, "Hey, I only want the reports coming to me." Sometimes they say, "Hey, I want them to come to me in the contractor, the builder." Ultimately, like I said, those will get pulled together. The designer is going to need to write a letter to sign off on it and then submit that as part of the permit process. So it's really up to the designer who they want to have copies of it and then who retains them for how long they need to retain them for.
And, Um, So when the project is done and all these reports are done and satisfactory, does the architect of record or structural engineer of record send them to the state all at one time, or are they just doing them as the project progresses? And I'm not sure even what the process is. Is there a portal they get downloaded in? How does that process work?
Yeah, and I think it's really that communications between the building department and the designer who's going to be submitting it of how they want that to be submitted. I think that's going to be a schedule that they determine. I would say most projects that we're involved with, we will do sections of the project as it gets completed. As I mentioned earlier, there'll be like we'll total tally up and supply all the reports for soil compaction, write a cover letter, submit. We'll do the foundations, write a letter, get all the reports, submit. All the structural concrete, and same structural steel. Each phase of the project will do that, but I think that's going to be up to the designer and the agency of like how they want to see that and how they're going to proceed. I'm guessing they're going to come up with a format that makes it easy so you don't get like, I mean, some of these sites that we go on, we might go on a site and there might be 10 reports. We might go on a site and there might be 1,000 reports. It really depends. So I'm sure they're not going to just want to get a Xerox box full of paper and say, well, here's all the inspection reports. You go take a look. I think they're probably going to want to, separate that out and kind of be organized a little bit. But I would assume they'll work that out ahead of time.
Get a project where you had 1,000 reports, which I can understand in a big project. I
Yeah.
can't imagine that the state even has enough staff to do it because they can't even get a building plan approved at this point. It takes 12 weeks.
Yeah. Here's what I would say to that. And this is just me just making a statement and it's an assumption. I would assume once the designer has, if you want to say they've reviewed those reports and they're writing their letter to the city or the building department, whatever it may be, they're writing that letter and they say, hey, we had a third party inspector. Here's all the reports. Everything that they did was per plans and specs. I would assume the city's looking at it and saying, okay, that makes sense. And they're giving it back. Could the city take it and start thumbing through 1,000 pages? I guess they could. I think that they're relying on the design professional to be a professional, and that's ethical and all those things that go involved with being a professional. So I think that's probably where that takes place. I don't want to speak for the building departments or anything like that, but I would assume I mean, part of being, like I said, part of being professional is being ethical, and I think that that's what goes into a lot of it. So I think that's probably it, but I don't want to say that for sure.
We do quite a bit of municipality work, and the
Yep,
municipalities aren't even enforcing it, so they'd have a tough time enforcing it in the private sector. And so I'm
exactly.
looking at one now. We're gonna be starting for City of Janesville, and there's they've got continuous inspection for footings and stuff, and they don't send anyone out. They don't employ their own testing agency or special inspector or anything. So it's be
Yeah.
really tough for them to start saying, "Hey, oh no, on our private sector, though, you guys got to do this."
Yeah, I would agree with you. And especially the way this is how it's been rolled out and if you want to say enforced or pushed out. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of this it's overwhelming for everybody that's involved with it. What needs to be done, how it needs to be done, who needs to see it, what needs to be done, who's going to sign off on this, who's going to submit this. I think that they're at a point where they're just trying to make it right, and I would assume that they're going to work with you. I would not expect for you to believe that you're following a format and you submit it in and then they go, oh, what are you doing? That's not what we need. You're not getting your permit. I find that tough. 10 years from now, maybe. Where we're at now, what are we like 8 months into it or whatever? I think it'd be pretty tough.
Yeah, I think
So
we're going to proceed business as usual.
yeah,
And we do the majority of these inspections and pretty much all our jobs regardless anyway. So, I mean,
yeah, that's right.
we're working with you guys all the time or CGC or whoever it might be. So,
Yep,
okay.
yep, yep, absolutely. I mean, when it comes down to it, like there's an inspector there that does the inspections, but at the end of the day, ultimately the contractors, it's up to him to build the project the way it's supposed to be built, right? And whether there's someone there or not to watch him, I mean, it's required, per what we've been talking about all day today. But ultimately, it's up to the contractor to make sure he builds it right as well too, So
All right, well, that brings
All right.
us to our time for the day. Thank you so much, Mike and Steve, for presenting. Thank you to everyone who joined us. I really hope that today's session gave you some guidance on navigating Chapter 17 special requirements on your projects. Hope you have a great and safe rest to your week, and we'll see you next time.